support, but also people are donating their time and thanking the staff for what's been really a pretty remarkable year in many ways, and a remarkably positive year for ANCA. That said, one of my tasks this afternoon is to thank two people who are going off the board. Kathy Dove has been president of Paul Smith's College and left Paul Smith's to move to the Boston area and has resigned. Steve Scafolano has also resigned. He is in his last year of teaching and wants to devote maximum energy to that effort. He has, however, made a commitment to remain involved with ANCA, and particularly anxious to support and committed to helping the diversity initiative. So I guess those are sort of bittersweet, but they've got pretty things going on in their lives. As I said, Steve Scafolano isn't going far, and we'll keep him involved. We have three new people on the board. Dr. Ty Stone is president of Jefferson County Community College and co-chair of the our regional REDC, and very excited about that addition. Lee Evans, when we recruited him, he had one job, and when he accepted, he had another, but he's now the sales director for U.S. Light Energy. Another really good fit for what ANCA is doing, and will be a great board resource for that effort. Brittany Davis is executive director of Lewis County Economic Development. They're already collaborating and working closely with ANCA. So those are just really three wonderful additions to the board. They have big shoes to fill in terms of the people leaving, but I'm very confident they will do that. We have elected three people to their second terms, John Bartow, Rob Bloom, Bill Farber. I think John Bartow is a little misleading because he was on before and then left and is back on for a second term. So I think it's actually more than his second term, but the second term in the sequence. And Courtney Grimes Sutton was reelected for a third term. The board officers who were elected, I have been reelected as president, Kelly Chisholm as vice president, Dan Moore as who is executive vice president and chief financial officer at Adirondack Bank as the treasurer, and Kate Malinowski, who is the executive director of Tug Hill Commission, as secretary. We have two regional vice presidents, John Bartow in the Capital Region and Brendan Owens in the North Country. We had a great board meeting this morning. We literally went to just the brink of our 12:30 auto cutoff with everything that was going on. I think we squeezed everything in before the world of technology ended us. I don't know whether Kate will comment on that, but we did adopt. So one of the things that ANCA does is tries to set examples, set up models, documents, and methodologies for others to emulate when we think we're doing well. And the board adopted a diversity initiative that I think is particularly well done. And we will be stepping into that in a minute. I don't know if Kate, you want to add anything, but I'm not. I think this falls into the someone who needs no introduction. But I'm introducing Kate Fish, who is the executive director, and I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, Kate, but if you do, otherwise the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Jim. We just got a chat that somebody doesn't hear anything. I just want to make sure that's resolved. Is everyone able to hear? Hopefully, yes. So anyway, thank you so much. My name is Kate Fish, and I'm the executive director of ANCA, and I just want to thank everyone who is who supports us, as Jim just mentioned, who participates, and we're really, really excited about this program. I think one of ANCA's strengths is for some reason we tend to be pretty prepared when really unusual stuff comes up, things that were unexpected and surprising. And, you know, no one could have predicted that either COVID would happen or that George Floyd's murder would precipitate a really, really important focus on Black Lives Matter in this country. So I just want to, so, you know, I feel good about the fact that ANCA seems to be in a you know, very prepared state all the time. We have amazing staff and very connected with our boots on the ground and networks throughout the communities. So your support, those of you who are supporters of ANCA, actually allowed us to do two really important things. And I'll just go through them very quickly. In mid-March, when New York State shut down due to coronavirus, one of the constituencies that we were very worried about and reached out to immediately and heard from immediately was our small businesses. And we were able to do a number of initiatives, really pivoting very quickly, kind of on a dime. So we did a twice weekly e-blast, helping our constituents understand, you know, the intricacies of PPP and, you know, some of the other federal initiatives that they could take advantage of. We created a map for local farms, and I think we're very, very happy to see a map where people could buy local food from local farms. And I think that helped precipitate a very positive season for the local farmers. We took survey results and shared with our constituents and shared them with Senators Gillibrand and Schumer and Representative or Congresswoman Stefanik to help inform the federal response to what was going on up here. And so that was great. And then also with thanks to the Shipley Center at Clarkson University, the Adirondack Foundation's Special and Urgent Needs Fund, and an anonymous donor, we were able to help nearly 30 businesses upgrade their e-commerce capabilities, develop their websites, and all of that so that they could stay in business and not depend on foot traffic. So those were some things that our COVID response happened. And then when George Floyd was murdered in May, there was a tremendous demand for Nikki Hilton Patterson's insight and help in terms of helping our communities deal with this. And so with your help, ANCA's staff was able to step up our support for her work. And that was really, really important. It was just the demands increased exponentially. Our staff has been working for a number of weeks on the cultural consciousness curriculum, and that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on today. The week after George Floyd was murdered, we accelerated the urgency of our work to become a much more diverse, equitable, and inclusive organization, something that is challenging for those of us who live and work in a predominantly white area, such as the North Country. And this is why we decided to focus on this topic for our meeting, just thinking of, as we go through this process and learn, hopefully we can share the learning and, you know, have that become something that other people will be informed by. So I just want to acknowledge two things. I always cry, you know me, I always cry at some point at our annual meeting. So forgive me, it always happens. Last year I had half the audience crying too. I can't remember why, but anyway. So I just want to acknowledge two things that to me are really important. One is starting down this path is a really humbling and personally uncomfortable process, I think, as we're all learning, and we need to embrace that. We're all examining white privilege and embracing and learning the depth of racism that permeates every aspect of our dominant white culture. And that's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. It's also pretty exciting. I've said to Nikki, you know, I feel like I'm learning a new language. And, you know, I've heard the background noise all the time, but I've never been able to really understand it. And now I'm beginning to understand and just be excited about a new world that's opening up. So I want to say it's also very exciting, but feeling uncomfortable, awkward, and, you know, just strange about this is okay. That's part of the process. The second thing I want to acknowledge, and this is also, I've never done this before. I've been running, you know, being in meetings for decades, and I've never done this before. So the idea was made me a little uncomfortable, and that is the way it is. I want to acknowledge that the Adirondacks were part of the lands of the Six Iroquois Nation Confederacy. The Six Nations are the oldest living participatory democracy on Earth, establishing a way for the nations to work together for over 800 years. Through the efforts of a group which included Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, their pioneering example was instrumental in the creation of the government of the US. We are sitting on their land, and being aware of that and of the knowledge and wisdom that, that they brought to bear at the formation of this nation, it also must be part of our journey as white people. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Nikki. She's been transformational for me personally, for our organization, and for, I think, a journey that is that we are undertaking, and that hopefully becomes part of the reckoning and part of the transformation of the North Country culture and economy. And I also want to say, Nikki, happy birthday. It's her birthday today. So we're really honored that you are here with us for this part of the of this session, and to thank you for the incredible work that you're doing, one, in laying the groundwork for this session, and also in having the courage to come north and be in our midst. So thank you, Nikki.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, Jim and the board of ANCA. I want to thank my core team members of the ADI core team. I want to thank the ANCA family members, but I want to also acknowledge the genocide, rape, and displacement of First Nations and Indigenous peoples, and the fact that we are occupying space. And a big part of the critical race, critical race consciousness that ANCA has been undergoing is acknowledging what it means for our bodies to be present and occupying this space that does not belong to us. And so I just want to welcome you all and thank you for coming and being a part of this conversation. And why racial equity, right? And so when we started this journey, people were saying, oh, we wanted racial justice or racial equality, racial equity. Racial equity is the standpoint from which we acknowledge, right, that equality is not enough. Equality assumes that if people are given the same resources, they can access the same kinds of mobility and opportunities, and that is not so. We understand that the data, we understand that the histories of oppression in this country has created specific obstacles that have been mobilized through capitalism and the way we live to disproportionately deselect and isolate Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So we recognize that. And so when ANCA approached ADI and said, we really do want to center the annual meeting on racial equity, this was an opportunity for ANCA to take a very, very difficult look at themselves, okay? And so before I agreed to work with the staff and the board on an annual meeting that is so ambitious, I wanted to know that they were fully committed to not just vocally or rhetorically articulate a very, very radical position around racial equity, but to do the painful, difficult, uncomfortable work of making themselves a presence, right? To disrupt legacies of oppression, systemic racism, and structural oppression, okay? And during the orchestration and preparation for this meeting, I met with the staff weekly, 3 and 4 times weekly, robustly preparing critical race consciousness sessions every single week, twice a week. We talked about what it means if you do invite somebody from the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities to speak with us, to share with us, to take us into this journey on what it means to do food justice when centering racial equity in food justice, what it means to center racial equity in clean energy, what it means to center racial equity in the business sector. And we talked about what's the difference between inclusion and tokenism. The difference is you do the work. You account for your implicit bias. You understand what whiteness means, especially since ANCA is a 99% white organization in terms of the people and how they embody the work. You account for those things. You learn what it means to decenter yourself and to center the voices, the spaces, the lived realities on the margin. And so today, this process, this annual meeting is not about how much ANCA knows. It is about walking into that space, walking into a very, very difficult space where you have to give up some things. You have to recognize your proximity to power and be willing to relinquish it, decentering yourself so that other voices can narrate their own stories and bring us along, okay? So today, I thank you for being here and thank you for joining us in this journey. It is an entry point for ANCA. It is an exploration and it will continue and go on, okay? And we will let you know more. Now, I want to thank the ANCA staff especially because I know that, especially for people of whiteness, this is a very challenging space to be in, but they never once backed away, even when the subject matter threatened everything they thought they knew about themselves, okay? So I wanna thank you and we're gonna have a wonderful lineup. We're gonna start with our own Dr. Adam Dewberry, who is an anthropologist and critical race scholar. He's also the food justice coordinator here at ANCA. Then we're gonna move to the clean energy team. And finally, we're gonna wind up with, we're gonna end with businesses centering racial equity in the businesses in transition or the soulpreneurship program here at ANCA. But we want to thank you. We wanna ask you to join us in this process as we grow, as we build, as we share, as we work as a team and a community to center racial equity and disrupt the systems and legacies of oppression that continue to exist, divide, and to separate us from progress. Thank you. Okay, so our session, I'm supposed to continue because I'm introducing the first speaker or the first presenter. Adam Dewberry is a cultural anthropologist and a critical race scholar who just happens, Dr. Adam, to work as the food justice coordinator here at ANCA. I am not going to reference Adam's bio. Very, as short as it is, it's accessible in your program booklet. But I've come to know Adam as one of the most critically conscious white males doing this work. Critically conscious around the intersections of race, class, urban communities, and whiteness. And he has done so far here at ANCA, he's done a phenomenal job of providing resources so that small farms and people who are producing in a sustainable way can access the resources they need to continue, right? And so today, Adam is going to speak to us about what it means to center racial equity when talking about food justice. He's going to talk about food deserts. He's going to talk about what it means when entire communities of color, entire Black communities, entire underserved communities, entire low-income communities do not have access to nutritious food, what that means as part of systems, capitalist systems, and how those work to reproduce denial of access to healthy living. So I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Adam Dewberry. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm going to welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. All right. So what I'm going to talk about today is structural racism in the United States food system. And, you know, working towards centering racial equity in our work, learning about this was a pretty critical step for me. I've been thinking about race and racism for a long time and studying it, but really digging into how it plays out in the food system was a little new for me. And really, once you become attuned to seeing it, it's absolutely everywhere. It's built right into it. So I want to start off with just some basic terms and concepts of what we're dealing with. So the food system is a network of people, places, and processes that grow the food, process the food, distribute it, consumers, disposal of food and food waste. Equity, Nikki spoke about equity a little bit. It's the quality of being just or fair, and it's very different from equality. Equality, what we think of as equality here in the US, I believe, is that everybody, you know, starts off with a level playing field. And that's really not the case. And as I'm going to show in my presentation, certain populations have really been incredibly disadvantaged. And part of working towards equity is healing that disadvantage and changing that before moving forward. BIPOC is an acronym for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. I often say BIPOC people, which I know is a little redundant, but I'm kind of loath to refer to a group of people without saying people too. I think it's really important to continually center humanity. One thing I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about is race, because this has been really one of the defining concepts of our nation. And I'm going to give a kind of a boilerplate anthropological definition of it, and then go through and unpack the history of the concept a little bit. So it's a culturally created system of classification of human variation based on observable traits. So we as people love to classify things. Indeed, it's crucial to our survival. But the categories that we make are not natural. Our impetus to classify might be, but not the way we classify things. These are cultural. So, and what we have, the concept of race that we have is really rooted in classical antiquity, especially, you know, two kind of key ideas: ideal types, that is, that organisms exist. There's an ideal type for every single organism. This has a big place in the biological sciences with type specimens. And then also the idea that there's a hierarchy, that organisms can be ranked. This concept is known as the chain of being. And you can find it in the writings of Aristotle and Plato. And these two concepts really filtered into the thinking of Enlightenment scientists, which is when race science really began. So we've got people like Petrus Comper, who developed a facial angle, which is a measurement of the difference between the forehead and the chin to classify people. Carolus Linnaeus, who gave us the binomial taxonomy that we use for scientific names, he developed a ranking system. and a classification system for people. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach did the same. And one of the interesting things about this is that in all of these classificatory systems, you've got white Europeans at the top and usually African people at the bottom. So built into this concept of race is this hierarchy. And this kind of racializing, especially with regards to Black and Indigenous people, really flourished in the 19th century United States. Why? Largely because of a justification for slavery. There was a loosely knit group of folks that were known as the American School of Anthropology, and none of them were anthropologists. And they were Samuel George Morton, who was a Philadelphia physician and president of the American Academy of Sciences, Josiah Knott, who was a physician in Alabama, George Glidden, who was actually not a scientist at all, really kind of a charlatan. He was sort of the hype man of this group and did a lot of promotion and such. And then finally, Louis Agassiz, who was a Swiss scientist of incredible renown, really famous. He was the Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye of his day. So we had some very powerful voices at this time speaking about this system, you know, and about this hierarchy of people and building it into our culture. Many of you might have heard of the Philosopher's Camp, which is kind of a famous Adirondack camping trip that happened on Follinsby Pond with William James Stillwell and Ralph Waldo Emerson. And Agassiz was part of this. And he was really, Louis Agassiz was really a virulent racist. He, in his works, he very explicitly wrote that Black people should be denied rights. And in fact, going so far as to write a letter in 1863 to the US Sanitary Commission saying that Black people should be denied basic freedoms. So this has a very deep history in our nation. It was this viewpoint was very widespread among learned people. It wasn't a fringe belief like hearing about it today. It sounds a little crazy, but this was very much the orthodoxy back then. And if you're interested in learning more about this, I would recommend a book by the amazing Dr. Nell Irwin Painter called The History of White People. It's a fantastic book. What I want to emphasize, despite all of this work and what I've just said, is that race is absolutely not a biological reality. And there are many, many people working to make us believe that it is so, but it absolutely is not. There is always more variation within groups than between groups. Even though race isn't a biological reality, it's very much a part of the lived experience, especially of Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. And much of this experience is negative. Being racialized as white, as I am, means that for me, race is really not a part of my lived experience. It's something I don't need to think about. I don't need to have, as W.E.B. Du Bois put it, that dual consciousness of myself as a being in the world and also as a raced individual. This is a big part of white privilege. And the reason for this very different lived experience is racism. So racism is the belief that a particular race or races are superior or inferior to others, but it's also a structural condition of unequal relations of power that disadvantages certain racialized groups. And this is really what I want to get into today with regards to the food system. It's easy to find examples of what structural racism is, but what I'm hoping to talk about a little bit today is how it actually happens and how things get into that structure. So, well, what does structural racism in the US food system look like? Looks a lot like this. There's a lot of racial disparity within the different sectors of the food system. So here we've got a white farmer out in her field. This other photo is from a Tyson meat packing plant. And one interesting thing that I learned in starting to do this work is that Black women especially are very highly represented in meat packing jobs, these low wage, very difficult jobs. But by and large, there are very few Black people who are involved in farming. So farms and farming really are a white space. White ownership of farmland in the United States, 98%. 94% of farmland is operated by white people. And why is this important? Because for BIPOC people, white spaces are often violent spaces. And this is something that we've seen on the news recently. It's come to real national attention. But this has been the case for a very, very, very long time. And not only the horrific physical violence, but also kind of psychic violence. And there was a recent dust up in the sustainable ag small farm community that really, unfortunately, highlights this. Everybody might be aware or familiar with Joel Salatin. He's probably the most famous farmer in America. And responding to an article written by a Black indigenous farmer that suggested that maybe small family farms aren't the answer and possibly cooperative farm ownership might be the way to go. This is what Joel Salatin had to say. And the ignorance that drips out of this quote is just unreal to me, especially when you consider the legacy of colonialism. You know, I know a lot of indigenous people who would love to return to the lands that were stolen from them, but it's just not possible. But imagine being a young Black farmer wanting to start, interested in agriculture, and this is what one of the icons of the movement has to say. It's a very, very unwelcoming space. This map shows Black farm operators in 2012. And if you look at the gray area, this is where the number of Black farm operators is 0. In 1910, 14% of the farmers in the United States were Black. As of 2020, that number has dropped to less than 2%. Let's contrast this with BIPOC workers in the meat packing industry. So this line of the graph here, these are all the workers in the United States, okay? And this kind of teal line are non-white workers. I apologize that the text is not very visible. If we look at the slaughtering and processing industry, we can see that's 65%. So 80% of the frontline workers in the meat industry are Black, indigenous, and other people of color. 50% of them are immigrants. How did we get here? Something Kate spoke about in her acknowledgement, dispossession. You know, dispossession has always been a major part of the American colonial project. It's often a very violent process. It's like settler colonialism. And post-Civil War, Black farmers were terrorized in the South during Reconstruction. There were Black codes that criminalized common innocent behavior. And this situation led to what historians call, was one of the things that led to what historians call the Great Migration, which was a northward movement of Black people out of rural spaces and into urban centers. So one thing I would encourage everybody to check out is the 1619 Project in the New York Times. And there's an article by Tremaine Lee that talks about the racial wealth gap. And it's got the story of Elmore Bowling, who was a very successful Black farmer. And he was, this was in the early 1940s. He was an entrepreneur. He had a trucking company. He had a farm. He had the equivalent of $500,000 in today's money in the bank. and he was murdered with impunity by a gang of white people across the street from his store. And then white creditors and people posing as creditors swooped in and took that money and basically put his family into poverty. So dispossession has a violent aspect, but it also acts structurally. And what I mean by structurally, through non-violent channels, but through social structures. So how is structural racism enacted? One of the things when we talk about structures, social structures, it's really important to remember that these structures are inhabited by people. And so nothing just happens. Things happen through the actions of agents. And we can see here how the USDA during the civil rights era worked to dispossess a tremendous amount of Black farmers from their land. Between 1950 and 1975, over 500,000 Black farms went under. So there are a couple reasons for this. The first was the orientation of the agency. The USDA, starting in the 30s, really began to embrace a very highly technical and capital intensive method of farming. So here we've got a farmer with his mule team, and here we've got a modern tractor plow setup. And it's this kind of farming, along with chemicals and stuff like that, that the USDA really was pushing. And this disenfranchised a tremendous amount of farmers, both Black and white, because they just couldn't afford it. Smallholders could not get on board with this very kind of capital intensive farming. They were able to farm because they could put their labor into it. But the USDA would not support that. So, and as with so many things, even though it harmed Black and white farmers, Black farmers were disproportionately affected by this. So after the Civil Rights Act, the USDA audited its programs and procedures and found that there was widespread discrimination throughout the agency. And they rhetorically adopted a pro-equality stance, but in practice, the discrimination continued. And a lot of that was because of how the USDA was structured. So we've got a federal agency that has state offices. Within a state, there are county offices. And then these county offices have local extension offices and agents. And it was these local agents that actually worked against Black farmers. And they used a strategy that Pete Daniel calls passive nullification. And what this basically was a withholding of information. White, individually racist, white USDA agents, especially in the southeastern United States, would simply not inform Black farmers of funding opportunities, of new farming technologies. They would keep these folks in the dark, and one by one, they dropped out and went under. And even when this was discovered by the USDA, it went unpunished. And what was especially egregious about this process is that some of these agents actually targeted Black farmers who were involved in the civil rights movement. For example, if they were NAACP members, they would just basically refuse to work with them. So how did they get away with it? There was a recent paper that I read about USDA discrimination, and these folks suggested that it was connections, fraternity, people binding together to protect one another, and a disconnect. So here you see how the actions of specific people feed into these larger social structures and can cause kind of outsized damage out of any sort of individual racism. The end result of this was a massive loss of wealth. And if you look in the southeastern United States here, this red, this is a wealth loss of $100 to $500 million, and this is wealth loss of 100, or this is $500 million and up, this red. This orange is 100 to 500 million dollars. So we could see here that land owned by black farmers in 1920 to today, we're seeing a wealth loss of $185 billion. Now, this is a huge problem. And how does this relate to the fact that we only have less than 2% of black farmers in the United States today? One of the main ways that wealth is built is through inheritance. And with this wealth loss, there wasn't anything to leave to succeeding generations of black farmers, which has seriously disadvantaged them. Any farmer will tell you, no matter what race they are, how they identify, that entering into farming is difficult. It requires a lot of capital. And here you've got an entire group of people through the actions of a government agency, through structural racism, who were disenfranchised from this. So I want to talk about food deserts a little bit. And this is a map of New York State. And you can see all of these areas here. These are census blocks that have food deserts in them. And if we look, this really covers pretty much all of ANCA's service area. It's a serious problem in a lot of places. But there's also a very strong racial dimension. And how this worked was through policy that had absolutely nothing to do with food. So what's a food desert? The USDA defines a food desert through a combination of low income and low access. The income piece of it is the poverty rate is greater than or equal to 20% of the population, or the median income, median family income, MFI of the population does not exceed 80% of the MFI in urban areas, or the MFI does not exceed 80% of the statewide MFI in rural areas. Low access, what that means is that urban areas, 500 people, or 33% of the population, live 1 mile or more away from a grocery store. And in rural areas, it's 500 people or 33% of the population living 10 miles from the nearest grocery store. And another very common definition of food deserts is an area that lacks access to healthy foods. Hilda Kurtz, in a 2013 paper on racism and food deserts, suggests using the term nutrition deserts. And food systems consultant Mary Gallagher, who's been working on this issue for a couple of decades now, uses only distance. So this is from a report called Unshared Bounty that was produced by the New York Law School Racial Justice Project in 2012, and it's a really fantastic resource. And it says, food deserts are a manifestation of structural iniquities that have been solidified over time. So what was one of the main structural iniquities that happened that led to the creation of food deserts? Segregation. This is a sign that is in Detroit in 1942, placed outside of the Sojourner Truth housing complex. And it was people protesting that Black folks were going to move into this. So, sociologist David Williams and Chiquita Collins once wrote that segregation was imposed by legislation, supported by major economic institutions, enshrined in the housing policies of federal government, enforced by the judicial system, and legitimized by the ideology of white supremacy that was advocated by churches and other cultural institutions. So in other words, segregation became a structural racism problem. Well, how is this enacted at these multiple levels of scale? So first, we've got at the federal level, the Homeowners Loan Corporation was a program that existed to get low-income people into housing. And what the HOLC did was deem borrowers that lived in racially mixed neighborhoods as being high risk. So they would not get the loans, which was the end result of that. The Fair Housing Administration, if a neighborhood is to retain stability, it is necessary that property shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. So this was perfectly legal at the time when this was going on. This is a practice known as redlining, and it was before the Fair Housing Act. So this was government sanctioned structural racism segregating neighborhoods. So in 1968, the Fair Housing Act was enacted, but racists will always find a way. And how they got around the official illegality of discrimination was through zoning policies at the municipal and local level. So restricting home occupancy, restricting multifamily homes. So zoning was a major way that segregation was enforced legally. And then finally, at the neighborhood individual, we've got gentrification, which are people moving into poorer areas, buying homes. This is a big problem in the Adirondacks, actually. And sociologists call this in situ displacement. And the end result of these processes, once again, is dispossession. So how did this lead to food deserts, though? Well, in part of this, there was also a large flight of, as Black people moved into urban areas, there was a phenomenon known as white flight, where white people would flee to the suburbs. And what happened there is the cheaper property values and a proximal customer base who were middle class and had disposable income drove businesses into the suburbs along with the white people and out of cities. You know, suburbs are residential largely and have kind of concentrated commercial areas. And this is one of the things that led to the birth of the supermarket, where, you know, people in urban areas would go to a butcher, go to a baker, go to a produce stand. But this kind of cultural shift and geographic shift into suburbs led to supermarkets. And once these places went to these neighborhoods, they did not go back. In fact, a neighborhood that is majority Black is half as likely to have a major supermarket as a majority white neighborhood. And the health implications of this are really staggering. And this is the really big problem with food deserts, is that people just don't have access to healthy food that is convenient. Instead, they have, some people call them food swamps. They have a lot of access to food that is very high in fat and sugar and sodium, and the resultant health problems that come from that. So when we can see racist policies at multiple levels of scale leading to dispossession conspired with other social changes to disenfranchise BIPOC people from access to healthy food, and that's how food deserts were created. So what can we do as individuals to begin dismantling structural racism in the food system? Well, the first thing we need to realize is that we have to dismantle structural racism entirely. It's not like we can just work on stuff in the food system. This is a systemic, national, cultural problem. But what we can start to do is support organizations that support BIPOC farmers. This is really important. We need to close this wealth gap. And this is one of the best ways to do it. I've got a slide that I'm going to put up after this that has some orgs that you can look at and support. Excuse me. Support food businesses owned by BIPOC folks. Create culturally conscious opportunities for BIPOC to learn farming, food processing, business skills, and gain experience. I read an article by a young Black and Indigenous farmer that said that a major kind of sticking point is that people of color might not feel comfortable working on a farm owned by white people and having to live there. And it doesn't take too much of an intellectual stretch to think about the kind of intergenerational trauma that might come to a young Black person if they're working hard essentially for free under the gaze of a white person. That's a big problem. We need to educate ourselves and others about race, racism, and anti-racism. This is super important, and it's a lifelong process. It's not something you take a class, you check a box, and you're done. And then finally, and this is the most important thing, you've got to speak up. If you're in a room with a bunch of other white people and you hear someone making racist statements, it's incredibly important to say something. Do not be complicit with your silence. This is the only way that we're going to start to change the tide. This is a massive task. We are dealing with structures and systems that have been in place for hundreds of years. And we're going to have to start chipping away at it one little bit at a time. So, and here are some resources that you can use to help support Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in the food system. And I am out of time, so I'm going to turn it over to some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dewberry. Adam, my friend, thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. This was an exceptional introduction because this is not even scratching the surface.
Right.
And I want to invite everyone, if you have questions, please upload it to our chat box. But just a little teaser, Dr. Dewberry will be leading one of our workshops, our anti-racism workshops in October. Okay, and he'll be doing some critical scholarship and teaching you strategies and techniques. He just talked about being actively anti-racist and as a white person or a person living as embodying whiteness, to speak up when you see racial implicit bias, to speak up and not remain silent. And I often say to my family here at ANCA that, and when they ask, Nikki, how can we help? It's wonderful to join a march. It's wonderful to, when the lights are on and the cameras are rolling, that's fabulous. It's wonderful to we appreciate Black Lives Matter signs but what the work happens in the quiet of your lives, right? The work happens when you have a lot to lose, okay? When you are sitting in the midst of power and speaking up might distance you from that power. That's when the work happens, and that's when it's critical, okay? Because silence is consent. All right, so I want to thank you, Adam, for reminding us about that. And I often think about gentrification as a Bronxite, and thinking how gentrification has sort of done its work in Harlem and Brooklyn, and now it's making its presence in the Bronx as sort of the last space where you can move out the underserved and the members of the BIPOC communities. But let me start, I'm gonna start off the question and answer section for Adam with, Adam, let's go back to a little education, right? You used structural racism a lot.
Right.
Systemic. So could you tell us the difference between systemic and structural racism, just to start off?
Sure. This is something that is the subject of a lot of debate. They're really kind of synonymous terms. I like to use structural racism just because of the word that it evokes. Systems, we have systems in nature that have nothing to do with people. So I like to use the word structural racism to kind of highlight that what we have is because of the actions of people choosing to do certain actions. And I think it also denotes a certain kind of historical view of these processes. Like if you think of a structure of a foundation, it's built little by little. And this is how structural racism was built in our society. And it's built, one thing I want to emphasize is that it's built right into every aspect of our political economy. This is probably not the place to get into that, But it's not just, oh, we've got structural racism in the food system. It's absolutely central.
Yes. I want to talk to you about, because you just brought up my favorite word. When I teach my class on the intersections of race, class, and gender, and I always land on the political economies of race and gender, right? And so you mentioned the word political economy, and you and I have had many conversations about almost the challenge not faced of doing this work within the capitalist system. And I know, look, we work in a capitalist system and I love my swag, okay? But how do we I believe that it is about making capitalism accountable to the people upon which it depends to thrive, okay? So talk to me about doing this work. How do you do this work? What are the first steps you're gonna take to do this work within the political economies of the North Country?
Well, the very first step that I'm going to do, I spend a lot of my time at ANCA trying to find financial resources for farmers and for food businesses. And what I've realized that I need to do is to keep doing that, but also to do some very targeted outreach. And this is what I think is kind of crucial to building equity. It's not just finding these resources and waiting for people to come to ANCA, but going out and finding BIPOC farmers, food entrepreneurs, et cetera, in our service area, and trying to bring these opportunities to them. You can't just sit back and wait for people to come to you. That doesn't build equity. Equity is an active process. So that's what the first step I'm going to take in doing this, and continuing to educate myself and to educate other people. I'd love to talk to some farmers who might have room and space where they could offer some training and experience to BIPOC people without them having to come live on their farm or make a commitment to it, where they could just show up, get some knowledge, and go home.
Excellent.
So the violent spaces, that can't be overstated.
No. Now we're running out of time, but there is a question that was submitted that I really do want you to get to, because it's a critical question that ties into what's going on in our country right now. Now, the questioner asks, how are current government farm bills and subsidies contributing to the structural racism that you have discussed?
Well, I think a lot of those programs are targeted towards large industrial agriculture. And all of these large industrial ag operations have had USDA support, sometimes for generations. So they're directly tied into what was going on. What I was talking about was happening with the USDA after the Civil Rights Act. I mean, that was when farming was really, when this sort of industrial farming was really starting to take off. And that's where I would see the relationship there. I mean, small farmers of all races are being cut out from this stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you. So as I was saying before, Dr. Dewberry is going to be leading a critical consciousness section, anti-racism session workshop for us in August with ADI. I am going to, at this point, we want to thank Dr. Dewberry, Adam Dewberry. He's a part of our community. He is a radical revolutionary. Yes, and an anti-racism activist, quietly doing his work. Most people don't know who he is, but he is an anti-racism activist. And I thank you, Adam. It is a pleasure to know you, and I'm excited to continue our work together.
And I would encourage anybody who wants more information or resources or anything to please reach out to me at ANCA. You can find me there. I'd be happy to talk with anybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn things over now to Jared Blay. Jared is the director for Clean Energy Program here at ANCA to continue with the second plenary session here at our annual meeting. Thank you so much. Bye.
And Nikki, I'm going to add one thing to your introduction, and that is that Jared, along with running the ANCA Clean Energy Program, was appointed by the governor to be part of a very small climate justice working group in the part of the implementation of the Climate Leadership Act that New York State has implemented. And the goal of that is working to ensure that all New Yorkers are represented in the state's transition to a cleaner energy future and benefit from investments and opportunities provided by this historic transition. So Jared, thank you so much, and to the whole team. I am so impressed with the ANCA staff, I have to say, and at what Adam just did, your work and the team's work in putting together this next session is very exciting to look forward to. Thanks, Jared.
Is my audio good?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Kate, for the introduction and for the opening comments. And thank you, Nikki, for your leadership and insight that you've brought to our organization since you've arrived. I also want to thank everyone on the call for joining us today at our annual meeting. We're extremely grateful and fortunate to have such wonderful support from people near and far. So before I introduce our next speaker, I want to share a few words. The Clean Energy Program chose the theme equitable workforce development in the clean energy industry in order to learn more and to improve upon our own practices. This session will provide an opportunity for us to explore together some strategies and tools to promote entrance into and to improve retention in the clean energy industry. The main challenge that we're facing in our region and across the nation is that systemic racism and structural oppression have created obstacles for entry into and upward mobility within the clean energy sector for members of the BIPOC community. We recognize and acknowledge very little opportunity exists in our region for individuals from BIPOC households to access jobs of any kind in the clean energy industry. Our vision for this session is to examine racial inequities in workforce development within our industry. And our goal is to examine strategies for increasing participation at all levels for racial and ethnically minoritized persons in order to develop, nurture, and retain a robust local workforce. Fortunately, we've found an individual who's been working in this space for the past decade or so, is willing to share her experiences and insight with us today. So without further ado, let me introduce Brianna DeFonso, who comes to us from Push Buffalo as their Director of New Economy. Push Buffalo's mission is to mobilize residents to create strong neighborhoods with quality, affordable housing, to expand local hiring opportunities, and to advance economic and environmental justice in Buffalo, New York. For Push Buffalo, building the new economy means restoring old cultural traditions of caring, sacredness, cooperation that have existed in the economies of indigenous peoples, communities of color, and other marginalized communities for thousands of years. They do this by working alongside their community to create and support social justice enterprises that center ecological restoration, community resilience, and social equity. Brianna first connected with Push Buffalo in 2019 through AmeriCorps. The people, places, and movements she met there set her on a course to pursue justice and transformation for and with her newfound community. Brianna brings an MBA education and continuous self-work in the anti-oppression to her work of managing social justice enterprises, consulting with nonprofits, and practicing the future in her community. Brianna, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jared. Thank you everyone for the invitation, and to the speakers and organizers. This has already been a really incredible experience, and feeling a lot of resonance with the themes and the boldness that everyone is already bringing into this space. So thank you. My name is Brianna DeFonso. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And for the last year and a half, I've been the director of New Economy at Push Buffalo. We are People United for Sustainable Housing. And I'm realizing I can also share slides. So I'm going to do that right now. There we go. Not sure why it's not going into presentation mode, but there we go. Needed to convince it. So we were founded about 15 years ago in Buffalo, New York, which is on Haudenosaunee land, as is much of the rest of New York. And a lot of our resources, as elsewhere, come from stolen land, labor, and lives. And so that's something that we bring the consciousness into our work, especially as we're interacting, as was mentioned, with these structural racism and the current capitalist system which exists to perpetuate it. Buffalo is on the Niagara River watershed and accesses the Great Lakes, so we have a border with Canada and access to a lot of fresh water. And so we both have, seen the issues of climate change, and also are likely to be a climate hub as the climate continues to worsen. We're the second largest city in New York State and the sixth poorest large city in the country. And unfortunately, we're extremely racially segregated. While we have a diverse population, you can look at maps of Buffalo and in other ways and see just very clear lines at the legacy of redlining and other activities that were very strong in Buffalo. And that's something we're still working on a lot to this day, among a lot of other issues. So we have a lot of work to do. Push was founded as a community organizing organization. And so the three sort of areas of activity that we do, that we try to get to work powerfully together, are community organizing, policy and advocacy, and then implementation. So really just showing on the ground a sort of proof of concept of this is what the people say that they want and need who live here and who are directly impacted by these things. Here's how we articulate it. For example, we did a lot of work with the New York Renews Coalition in crafting what became the CLCPA that was mentioned. Climate legislation, particularly putting in equity and benefits to frontline communities in it. But then the third piece that's really important is to actually have these testing grounds or proof of concept, or things where we're actually showing that what we're advocating for actually does work. It works for the people and it works for the community. And so we're trying to make sure that we're practicing the future that we want to see. Our goal is a new economy. So our analysis is that there are many things we need to do to address issues in the current economy, but that none of them are ultimately going to get us to where our radical vision for collective liberation is, where we want to see an entire economic system that is designed around social and ecological well-being. And we're not there right now, and we know there's going to be a lot of work to get there. So what can we do in the meantime? How can we be building that knowledge and infrastructure and community to make sure that we're moving in that direction? So some of the slides I'll go through a little quicker, and others I'll spend a little more time on based on what I think will be most helpful for this session. So part of our analysis, as I mentioned, is who builds it, who owns it, who benefits. So things like the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, CLCPA, it's obviously definitely something we want to move towards, to have a clean energy future, but the way that we move there is really important, so that we're not just providing another income stream for large corporate polluters, or like the 1% or the 98% white controlled areas. We want to make sure that the people who are living in these frontline communities, primarily BIPOC people who have just had multiple different legacies visited on their economics, their families, their bodies, their land, that they are actually seeing the economic and social and ecological benefits of the transition to a cleaner economy and cleaner energy in particular. So how can we take a big, bold vision like that and turn it into something that we actually can be working towards today, as well as with that knowledge of the bigger goals. And I think that part of it for us is just where the money is going. And that's something that really has led me in my path here, in how I look at things, is like, what are some of the root causes? What are the things that we really need to get to that are going to change more of the system and more of the structure than just some of the symptoms? And for me, that really is money and the structures and systems around money, who controls it and who is able to access it. A lot of social justice movements from the past that we see ourselves aligning with, they had actually very specific goals for legal things that they needed changed, for economic things they needed changed. They had like these different areas and agendas, and generally what you see is that they get the legislative wins because that's less dangerous to the status quo and the people who are in power, and the systems and structures that are designed to self-heal, to maintain, to continue in closing. That if you don't win the economic benefits, that you've only won half of your battle, and the easier, sometimes less important path, and that sometimes that's enough to sort of divert some of the energy and the urgency from the movements, and so they never end up meeting their full potential because that economic piece was withheld. And so for us, it's really crucial that that lens comes into everything. So I'll go through this one kind of quickly too, but I'm talking a lot about the new economy, and I know I'm in a group of people who are also talking and thinking this way. One of the tools that we've found really helpful and have adapted and adopted in our work to an extreme extent is our partners Movement Generation have been really instrumental in articulating the new economy's vision for a just transition, which is language we are borrowing from labor movements in the past. And specifically, it talks about, an analysis of our current economy that's built around extraction and exploitation, and how we want to move to a regenerative economy. And so how do we actually get there? Because we can't just leap, we can't just snap our fingers, so what is the actual process? And bringing it down to a very practical level as well as theoretical. We have these guiding visions and values filter, but then we have very specific concrete steps that are accessible right now today in our world, because that's what we need to start moving towards this other world. So one of those concrete steps that Push has been working on for actually quite a while, about 10 years now, is something we call the Community Hiring Hall. And so basically this started when, in the early days, Push was seeing what do people need the most in our community. We have a very localized vision. So it's actually part of our theory of change that the people know what they want where they live, and that we're drawing those boundaries on like the neighborhood level so that we as an organization can stay accountable and stay knowledgeable and have solutions that are crafted to the ecology and culture and self-identification of people in a relatively small local space that then could be networked up to other spaces that also know what they want where they live, but their solutions might have some things in common and have some different implementations. So we're working primarily on the west side of Buffalo, although different things we do touch much bigger sections also. So we first found out what people needed, which was primarily affordable housing and good jobs. So we kind of tried to tackle both of those by starting to build our own projects and getting the people in the neighborhood able to do work on them. And originally we were trying to just make connections so that they could, be hired by developers or start apprenticeship in a union or whatever those tracks are that exist that would help, primarily BIPOC and low income and returning citizens to be able to access what's already out there that other people can access. And we ran into just a lot of problems. And, you know, it certainly works sometimes for some people, but for the majority of the people we're working with, it was a system that was really designed to keep them out and was doing a really effective job at it. So, as with a lot of things, we thought, well, then we'll do it ourselves. And so the hiring hall has really changed a lot over 10 years, just based on capacity and what's going on and what our different partnerships have been. But really, it stayed the same. We're trying to work on whatever hands-on experience and training will help get people into primarily green jobs. So, you know, environmental and clean energy and all of those things. These are good green jobs that we see are already coming to our community and are only going to be accelerated. And we want to make sure that, you know, our community and frontline people can be involved and be benefiting from it, to have like the knowledge and the expertise to build their own individual wealth and then also be able to build community wealth. This is the way that we would like to see these things happening. So right now it's a little bit of a smaller project. We have maybe pre-COVID at least, we have about 3 to 7 people who are working on a site at any given time, and then about 20 to 30 who are pursuing jobs or who are being connected to more traditional workforce development, things like that. So we support that right now. We were just able to get our part-time staff person up to full-time. It's still one person, and it also was moved under my department when I started at Push. So I can provide some of that higher level support, but it's primarily from like grant writing and business development and things like that. So we mostly are supporting this work through grants. The biggest one for us has been an EPA grant, Environmental Protection Agency grant that's primarily for brownfields, which is a little bit outside of our goal and focus on green jobs and clean energy. But in Buffalo is actually a lot more closely related because we have such an extreme environmental legacy of industrialization and toxicity that particularly in the city, any building site whatsoever, whether there's a building there or whether it's just the ground, you're dealing with an intense need for remediation. You know, like some of my non-push work has involved community gardening and other efforts in the city, and, you know, just knowing how incredibly toxic the land and the water still are. It's something that we have to deal with. So we sort of have to do the healing first and then the growth. And so for us, it's sort of a spectrum. So we do trainings, we do a lot of wraparound supports because, you know, we're really, while we recognize the value in trainings and in skills and certifications, and they're definitely needed for some of the jobs that we're looking at, we're also pushing back on this very, I think, colonialist and classist idea that, oh, the only gap here is just education. And if people would just, you know, like take a class and get a job placement, that then like it's all going to work out. And that's really one of the least important things to be addressing if we're really working on our goal of equitable workforce development and placement. And a lot more of it has to do with the wraparound services because, you know, workforce development at its heart, it can't be just trying to help someone get and maintain a job without addressing all the other systems that they're dealing with and all these other things that are very rightfully pulling a lot of their time and effort and capacity away from purely employment related things. So we place people directly, we do policy and advocacy, and we also can act as a high road temp agency, which is something that is probably our most problematic piece, but has also been a useful tool for us because of the very high nature of temporary placements, particularly for general laborers in the construction industry, which is where a lot of these green trades are based. And so it's something where we thought, if this is how it's going to have to be, then let's make sure that they can go through us where they're earning at minimum a family sustaining wage, and we're giving them things like personal protective equipment, basic tools, transportation stipends, like all these things that help make this actually achievable that they wouldn't be getting if they were just going through somewhere else. And for us, policy and advocacy has been really important because, you know, we can spend all our time working on, you know, trying to just convince one developer that it's worth, you know, taking on some hiring hall laborers, or we can spend that time working with people like at the city or the county who are looking at their procurement policies and saying, hey, not only is it a good idea to have some sort of like minority participation requirements or first source hiring requirements, but also if you take the potential political risk to put that in there, you will be able to deliver on it. There's actually the people and the training and the systems that are there so that these goals can be achieved by the contractors. You're not setting them some impossible bar, they can actually do it. So that's been really, really helpful for us. Another thing that has really helped is we've continued to develop our own projects. And so not only being able to leverage, you know, labor on those projects, but also to demonstrate that these things are very possible and very practical. So for instance, the current project that we're designing two, I'll talk about the other one in a minute. One is a scattered site 50 unit development that is just, you know, urban infill. It's just quietly going in and matching the neighborhood and just filling in some of the vacant spaces that we have. And we're designing it to meet various like passive house and net zero kind of standards where we're hoping and planning that the whole project, all total of 50 units, is going to be completely without gas infrastructure, that is all going to be run with clean heating and cooling and distributed generation with solar and things like that. And it's also going to be 30% supportive housing for people who have a mental health diagnosis and are experiencing homelessness. So to be able to show that like these two things aren't separate and that they can be and should be together, and that it's practical to do so, you know, that affordable housing is not generally where people are looking for the highest level, you know, climate and clean energy kind of goals. But we think that's exactly where it belongs and where it needs to be. And also the people that it's designed to benefit should also be able to get the training and the jobs to build it and to maintain it going forwards. So that's one of the things we're working on. The other one, this is just a sort of artist rendering. This is not what it's actually going to look like, but we're in the early design phases for a sustainability workforce training center that is in our neighborhood on the west side. It's pretty small, it'll be about 3,000 square feet, but we really want and need to have a physical space where we can do a lot more of these more advanced green trainings. And our goal is that this building is actually a learning laboratory where there's lots and lots of pieces of it that are visible, and they're either, whether they're like sections of the wall panels behind plexiglass, or whether it's screens monitoring the performance of the various energy generation pieces of it, people can actually see, you know, like, oh, this building that I'm in every day for whatever training I'm doing, I see the look and the feel and how it works, and I can like see all these things actually in place, and it's not a foreign thing, and it's not something that's like, oh, for, you know, rich people or white communities or, you know, whatever that is. That actually it does have a lot of relevance to people's lives. And so there were a few questions that I wanted to make sure I got to kind of frame the rest of this and not, you know, just talk about what we're doing. And so one of them was talking about how can we recruit, retain, and support a talent pool that's racially and ethnically diverse. And so this is something that is one of our main questions all the time. And, you know, I think there's definitely a huge part of it that's going to vary based on the context and culture and geography of wherever someone is. But I think there's also some things that are in common that, you know, everyone can kind of start from and then adapt. I'd say the biggest thing for sure, which is unfortunate because it feels like the hardest and most out of our control piece, has already been brought up in an earlier session. So I was really happy for that groundwork to be laid, is that the actual end workplace that someone's going to be in is the most important thing. And so if that environment is violent or alienating or any number of things, hopeless because you're not progressing or whatever it is, that kind of career isn't going to be as attractive off the bat as people think it might be. Like, oh, here's a good job. It's good for you in the environment and makes lots of money. What's there to say no about? And that for someone looking at that space and knowing that it's going to be a potentially violent or difficult space for them, it may turn them off from it in the beginning, or they may get into it with a lot of excitement and hope, and then just the reality of it is going to not be sustainable, and they're going to end up very rightfully choosing their mental health over this job that they really wanted and hoped would be a career for them. So that's really the biggest thing that we can do, I think. And not all of us are going to be in positions to do that. When you're someone who's hiring, definitely there's a lot of things you can do to affect that, to have it be a more equitable process, and to make sure that there's a lot of like proactiveness in making a welcoming environment, and that you're doing the work ahead of time, like you all are here, to find out what those things are and to be educated and to take down some of those barriers before they even happen. Tiny side example is, and I know this is governed by, so depending on what kind of agency you are, but disclosing the salary range in a job posting is really huge, because that's one of the mechanisms in structural racism that has been used to make sure that people with BIPOC identities or women are going to continue to be underpaid. And so to have equitable and equitably applied salary ranges in the beginning, and then B, to disclose them in the hiring process, that's something that already is this huge step that you've taken that's very much under your control if you have anything to say in the hiring process at a place. If you're more from the outside and wondering how you can help, like advocate or support businesses or other places that are hoping to do more of this, I think honestly something that has helped is to make sure that there are some sort of like regulations, legislation, policies, some sort of mechanism that is setting goals for certain things, and then two, that is being actually enforced, because we have a lot of things that locally and even at the state and federal level that are trying to address some of these gaps, but when the people who are generally benefiting from a lot of these economics aren't, when they know that it's not going to really affect them in any serious way, they're less likely to really put a lot of time and effort into making sure that it's implemented and making sure they're meeting those goals. So the accountability piece is really huge. And for us, that is an opportunity to, if you have that sort of like regulation or goal or something that's like really clear, then you can take someone's, what hopefully is their own sort of values or initiative or way they see themselves or their company, and kind of you have more oomph, you can get a little further because you can overcome kind of their cognitive dissonance that they're doing this just because it's the right thing to do and it has nothing to do with the regulations or anything like that. But I think you really need both to get people over that hump when you're dealing with like really difficult things like this. I think another thing I already touched on, so I won't go too far into it, is that a lot of training programs and their funding sources are really focused on the educational piece, and they either don't fund or don't provide or don't do an adequate job at some of the like wraparound support and other barriers, or they're not they're not as like radical or powerful or resource backed as they need to be. And I think that that, you know, comes from some pretty harmful mindsets. Again, thinking that, oh, education is the thing, and if you have that, everything else falls into place, when really that's only people who are very privileged have that experience of the system most of the time. But it's not going to actually work that way for someone who doesn't have those privileges. So, you know, just making sure that you're thinking about all the other systems and seeing what you can do to kind of break someone out of those, even temporarily, to be able to have the breathing space to then get training, get a job, start building that stability, and then making this an actual career. So yeah, I think the other thing is just some of that comes from a sort of really harmful mindset of that we've all heard the phrase of things like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which is supposed to be this sort of like goal, like that's like, oh, everyone should be able to do this, and if they can't, it's like a moral or a character failing. And one of the things about being, before my MBA, I was a history major and an English nerd, and that phrase, when it first originated, was actually like a sarcasm thing. It was mockery. It was picking something that was like the most unbelievable, unrealistic, impossible, physically impossible sort of thing, sort of like a, you know, like when hell freezes over, like, oh yeah, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. Like, it was recognized that that's not actually something an individual can do. And it's silly to even think that they could really like do everything all on their own. You know, it was a literally a phrase designed to remind people and to maybe like put them in their place a little, that you only succeed with the help and the efforts of your communities and your background and, you know, your generational traumas or lack of traumas, your privilege. You know, there's all these things that go into it to actually help someone succeed. So you are a part of that, but you're not the only piece of that. Okay, I'm also checking on my timer. So yeah, so another focus we wanted to have was about maybe working with school programs, so we can get, you know, youth and young adults more interested and excited and on these career tracks. And I think that's one of the #1 answers that we've come up with too, is just that there's a lot of systems already in place to kind of provide that opportunity to get to talk to young people and, you know, encourage them to go into STEM fields and things like that. And, you know, generally they happen during the school day in a way that, you know, people aren't having to choose between getting some training and feeding their family. That usually it's in a way that's more accessible for them. And also it's just nice because these are not careers that are often talked about. And also, I think, especially with clean energy and some of the more advanced green jobs, a lot of my issues with some of how certain programs have approached things like STEM and things like the trades is that they make a really strong choice that's still steeped in that internal hierarchy that, oh, because you're, you know, maybe black or brown or whatever it is, because you're from this background, you shouldn't try something like college or something like that. You should just go into like working with your hands or whatever. Like, they're making it a very either or. And so that is felt like very strongly by some of the students who are hearing it. It's less of an empowering message. And so just being more aware as we're bringing that message, and also knowing that it doesn't have to be an either or choice, that there's a lot of things you can do if your goal is education, like still consider these fields, because you know, these two things combined can get you really far, can get you towards your goals. And hoping again that we're able to frame these sectors as something that is very immediate and urgent and rooted in their own community and culture and health and history, that it's not something that's this like far away thing. And then also being realistic, because something that we've found and something that one of our partners has found who focuses on getting women into construction is that these training programs, whether for youth or adults, can paint too rosy or exciting or encouraging of a picture, somebody's like, yeah, that sounds great. And then what happens is they actually get into it, and none of the root systems or difficulties or reasons that there aren't as many women or people of color in these fields, they're all still there. Like nothing has actually been fixed except for the recruitment pitch. And so it's really hard for those to be sustainable because, again, it's just a very difficult and violent environment. So we want to make sure that they're at least realistically prepared and that we're not like sugarcoating anything. I'm going to skip through just a little bit because we're getting low on time. And I want to leave some time for questions, but I think I actually I worked some of my takeaways into my presentation, but just wanting to, there's my timer. I don't know if it's the same as everyone else's timer, but that was my personal one. So yeah, just giving people encouragement that while this seems really impossible because it's tied to so many issues, that this is the work and this is something that is helpful, and it's a long road that we're on. So, you know, the slow path and keeping focused on the bigger wins, I think are where we're going to get to. And just that it is our responsibility, you know, like it's definitely like white people's job to work on things like racism. It's, you know, men's job to work on things like sexism. Like there's every ism you can think of, like we have to take that responsibility and do that self-work, not just to recognize it and feel like, oh good, now I know this, so I'm great, but to continue like speaking up and fighting for it and finding ways that are going to change it. I think also looking beyond who we are as individuals, that while that's very important, especially for taking responsibility, there's a lot of these structures and systems and entities like corporations and the military where these are actually a lot of the places we can go to have a stronger effect, than rather just like beating ourselves up about every single thing or every single like individual job placement. We have to go back to some of those root causes and root actors and really focus a lot of our, you know, efforts and our activism there, because it's going to have a bigger effect on everything as it comes down. And that this is really important, especially things like making sure that frontline communities have access to the clean energy economic future is really important. We all are facing the climate change crisis. We're all in the same storm, but not in the same boat, as I heard someone say. And so this is becoming more and more and more urgent that we all are able to work on this together, and that we have the resiliency and the knowledge within our communities to be able to address this. And so I'm just heartened to be able to be spending my time at Push and then meeting with wonderful people like ANCA, who are all working on this. So I'm going to end my presentation here, and I don't know, Jared, if you'll facilitate the questions, but
Yes.
I'm available.
Veronica, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. You bring unique perspective and a set of experiences that really kind of get to the root of what we're discussing here. I think it's important to acknowledge that within ANCA, and especially within our clean energy program, I mean, we're in the infant phase of this. We're just starting to really unpack and explore how we can make a difference in our own region. So I just want to say thank you, and that we appreciate what you brought to the discussion. So in the interest of time, because we are over by a few minutes, we had some prepared questions, but I think I'm going to change it up and just ask just one question, because we're running out of time here, from the chat box. So let me scroll up and find it. And here it is. If we were to try to replicate your work in the North Country, what would you recommend for a first step? Follow-up comment. We are rurals, so some fundamental differences, but also likely many core goals and strategies that could be identical. So
yeah, I'd say both at Push and at other places I've worked in Buffalo, you know, we would have questions like this a lot for the different projects. And I think there are always two answers. And one is really get to know and be led by the people who are the most impacted. The people closest to the problem are the people with the solutions. And so really being rooted in your community and in the people who you're hoping to be working with and benefiting is the number one thing. And it may sound obvious, but I really mean it from a place of like, no, over my experience over the last decade and of everyone else I've worked with who has decades and decades more experience, that I think is the key to structuring a program that's going to work practically as well as something that's going to like be sustainable, because it's something that is literally drawn from the community, and so it's not, you're not going to be sitting there as often going, well, why didn't they come? But we had free pizza. So yeah, and then I think the other piece is really being creative and adaptive to your own area, and particularly culturally and geography, what makes the most sense there. I mean, even in Buffalo, which is more dense, our number one by far barrier is lack of transportation. Either, you know, lack of a car in a very car designed city, or even just like the poor quality of public transportation. Even for us, that's the biggest thing. And so when we can see like, okay, that's like one of the biggest barriers, we have to start throwing more at it than just like hoping that people can navigate it on their own. So coming up with ways to do like giving circles or carpools or stipends or whatever it is that like gets people over this hump, over this barrier, and then they're able to actually get into some sort of stability and sustainability.
Excellent. Anna, thank you so much for thoroughly answering the question. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in our future for us to discuss this further and in depth. So I'm sure we'll have some follow-up conversations. Again, thank you for sharing your expertise and for your time today. I'm going to turn it over to Kate and go from there. You.
Great. Hi. Thank you so much, Brianna. That was fantastic. That was really interesting. I've admired Push Buffalo from a distance for a long time, since you and ANCA have been also working on some of the same NYSERDA programs. So there's been some collaborations, and I really have admired the kind of work and leadership and vision that you bring to the table. So thank you. We are going to just power right on through. If you need to take a break, just, you know, go take a break. But we had a break scheduled and we're running a tiny little bit behind. We have one more session to go, and I think it's going to be really, really interesting and dynamic. I want to introduce Danny Delaney, who's another rock star ANCA staff person who's working on a program that I think is transformational for the area, as the diversity program and the clean energy program is, and the local food system program. Danny brings a tremendous amount of kind of creativity and patience and perseverance and vision to the work that she's doing in implementing the Center for Businesses in Transition, which is a program of ANCA's. So Danny, you know, without further ado, I just want to turn it over to you so you can move us into the next part of the program.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you for that very nice introduction. Yeah, no, we're just really excited to be here this afternoon, and the focus of this session is going to be on centering racial equity and providing access to capital for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And it's being a solopreneur, that's kind of what we're focusing on. So individual folks who own a business and really taking on that hard emotional and intellectual labor of operating on their own. It's hard for anybody, but it's especially difficult undergirded by systemic racism, and especially in a place like this where it's predominantly white and rural. And we are just so delighted today to have with us Valerie White. She's the executive director of LISC New York City. Valerie is responsible for building on $3.1 billion in LISC New York City's investments to spur affordable housing, business development, health and jobs in economically vulnerable neighborhoods throughout New York City. And I could read her biography, but she's just really incredible and you can read that on your own. But she's not a stranger to the North Country. And I think it's really great to have somebody here who is coming in. She previously worked at ESD. She was the Empire State Development. She was the executive vice president there, as well as the executive director of the agency's Division of Minority and Women's Business Development. She's been doing this work for a lot of years, traveled all around the state. We had a great conversation yesterday just to get ready for this call. And I found out that her first business trip that she ever went on as an adult was at the AMA right here in Saranac Lake. So she had been working for the AMA, and her first business trip was right here in our town. She stayed at the Hotel Saranac. So we're so excited that you're familiar, and you've been doing presentations all over the place through ESD. Now you've taken on this really dynamic, incredible role. Is there more to your biography or more about your history that you want to share with us? And folks, we don't have a presentation. We're just going to talk. It's Friday afternoon. We're going to have a chat. We're going to have a good afternoon and strong here. So Valerie, tell us more about yourself.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for the invite. I was so incredibly excited to see and have the opportunity to speak to everyone from the North Country. As Danny said, that was my very first business trip in 1983. So that tells you how long ago that was. But it's so incredibly beautiful, and I've been to the North Country, of course, many times since. Just a little bit about my, I've worked for New York City for a number of years and spent almost 2 decades working on Wall Street before I retired from that job, and then have had the opportunity to return back to government and the public sector. And in doing so, identifying the types of jobs that are impactful, that bring a difference in community development, economic development, the growth of minority and women businesses, and just ensuring that there is an opportunity to discuss, to provide consult for equity, right? Equity in terms of being a full part of the economic framework of our state, of our country. So as Danny mentioned, my very last position prior to going to LISC, I headed up New York State's Division of Minority and Women Business Development. Although it sat within Empire State Development, I had oversight over the entire state of New York. And I'm looking at names. I may have come across a few of you because I had the opportunity to go across the state and message the MWBE program, the certification program, the business development program, answer lots of questions about how that would, the certification would assist businesses to get state contracting. And for some of you who know me, probably answered questions on why your certification was taking so long, because it was a lengthy process, but there's other people you can ask about that now. But I made the decision to go to LISC because our mission is to ensure that we are investing in communities and in businesses that traditionally have been disinvested in, that might be disadvantaged because of their location, the makeup of the community members, or the business owners. So this is really an opportunity to take, all parts of my career and utilize it to bring that level of equity. And that's what we're working on right now at LISC in New York City. There are a total of 35 LISC offices across the country. We operate as affiliates, and then there's a LISC National that provides us guidance and overall goals and mission driven formats so that we can operate in our various markets. There is one other list in the state of New York, and that's the list Western New York, and they assist the communities from, I want to say like Auburn, maybe, Rochester and Auburn and over to Buffalo and north or south of that. So just very happy to be here and interested to start getting into the discussion, Danny.
Valerie, thank you so much. And we're so excited to hear more about your work. I'm going to ask Audrey, or I'm sorry, Lexi or Lauren, if you could just put in LISC's information in the chat box for folks if they want to check out more, that would be great. So Valerie, you had said, even in just this introduction, so one of the things that you focus on is ensuring that there are opportunities for equity, for business development, for BIPOC people. Tell me a little bit, or tell us all a little bit about, what are those barriers that specifically BIPOC solopreneurs have in accessing capital? If folks are trying to get money, like what does that look like, and how are some of the ways that they have barriers that maybe we don't think about?
Just in my experience here at LISC, but also working with a number of solopreneurs, particularly those in the BIPOC space through the state. One of the biggest issues that I have found, and that generally is the case in the industry, is just number one, where the capital is, and number two, what it takes to get the capital. So I'll start with the second. Many times capital infusion, capital access requires quite a bit of work in terms of paperwork, in terms of ensuring that all of the things are in line. So sometimes we have people from various businesses come and they don't have everything together. So they really need a great deal of technical assistance to sort of understand the framework and be in a position to move through the process quite quickly. In North Country, there's access to that assistance through the various Entrepreneur Assistance Program, EAPs, that could be located through the ESD regional office. But sometimes it makes sense for solopreneurs to go and seek that technical assistance. Much of it is free of charge, in order to ensure that they have everything needed to put their best position forward to access capital. But that being said, there still statistically has always been a difficulty for Black, Indigenous, people of color to get access to capital, just simply because some of the banks just haven't really been that really not been that helpful in looking at those businesses and women-owned businesses as well. So the best way to have success in that area is for the solopreneurs to get that assistance ahead of time when they start to think about what capital they need. The other thing that's important is to understand what you need the capital for. So you need to have your general business paperwork together, but also a business plan. Why do I need capital? How am I going to spend it? How is it going to, impact my margins? And what opportunities will I have to be able to pay back the capital in a timely fashion? So just having doing that extra step prior to going for the loan or other capital request is always helpful.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And you said there are resources here that we can use through the state. And
right.
One of the things that you said about national statistics is that one of the statistics that we pulled out in the program that we think is really was surprising to me as a person, right, is that Black households were much more likely to be unbanked.
Yes.
And then it ends up being part of the capital problem a little bit. Can you talk about that at all, or is that something that you experience in your work?
Oh, absolutely. I think the whole, concept of unbanked, it is generally, you see, that is something that Black households in general are more likely to be unbanked than white households. But there are, similar unbanking situations for other people of color as well. And I think a lot of it has to do with what it takes to be banked. right? So many times there's fees. You have to leave a certain amount of money in an account, in order to utilize the banking services. So where there are, and then there's also not, the education about financial wealth, financial literacy that's available to certain communities, sometimes that are most inhabited by Blacks, but it's also, impactful in communities of poverty as well. So just having the access, additional excess funding to leave in a banking situation is not always possible. Where that gets resolved in some cases are through institutions like community credit unions, sometimes CDFIs in some ways, or just sort of a joint pooling of opportunities. And that's where, if there is a deliberate way to ensure that there are banking options available in the community, then you might see that change. And there are some communities that do that, whether it is a credit union format or just a joint banking opportunity. So yes, but that does, and if you're not banked and you're not accustomed to banking and you start a business, then the whole sort of concept of going to get access to capital becomes, somewhat foreign and overwhelming.
Yeah, but you're doing so much work through your organization to address that issue and access to capital through LISC. I really appreciated the sort of transformation agenda that you've been starting to put out. I'm just going to read this because I could never say it better, right? So enough is enough. Let's create a new reality where the environment for Black and Brown-owned businesses, which are the lifeblood of disinvested communities, is transformed, and there's finally a level playing field for everyone. Tell us about your incredibly transformative work that you're doing to address these things through your organization.
Well, we've actually, stepped back and took a look at what are the contributors historically to systemic racism in the economic front, but it carries over to our society. So we wanted to be sure that the programmatic aspects that we are implementing identified and very boldly address those issues. Particularly unapologetically, because we're in a moment right now. There's been so many moments, right, going back 400 years, right, particularly for the Black community. What are the moments? And then there'll be a demonstration and maybe one or two changes in law or policy, and then we find ourselves right back to the same place. So one thing that we are saying is that we do realize in general that minorities, don't always get the same equitable treatment as non-minorities, but we've also recognized that the experiences of those minority groups are different. And because they're different, they're going to have different systemic impacts. So we have to acknowledge that, recognize them, and start to remove those one by one. So in terms of our economic development transformative agenda, we basically wanted to be sure that there were elements that carried through in its linkage of programs that would allow for the growth of the businesses. So of course, right now we're in the COVID, we're amid COVID. We know that has had a hugely impactful and negatively effect on businesses in general, in particular on small businesses, and then in particular businesses run by people of color in certain communities. And the reason that is because their businesses are closed. Those are the economic lifeblood. That's the commercial quarter of those areas. But then when you layer on top of that the issues of racial injustice, particularly when you deal with the financial history of how these businesses have been able to form, it becomes overwhelming. So we wanted to be sure that there were steps that were long-term in a strategy to actually assist these businesses through COVID. We can't talk about post-COVID, unfortunately, because none of us know when that will be, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be anytime soon. So, and you realize at the beginning of this crises, everyone's like, okay, we have to be ready for post-COVID. And most crises have a definitive end. When you think of the hurricanes or the snow or 9/11, or in New York we had Superstorm Sandy, or even the financial crisis of 2008, there was an end, and then there could begin to be a process of rebuilding and repairing. Well, this crisis is different. There is no end. We don't know when it's going to be. And so we have to figure out the best way for businesses in general and all of us to function. But then, how does that continually impact small businesses? And then how does that continually impact small businesses that are owned by people of color? So the first thing, that you've seen, is just the infusion of capital. There was the PPP program, payroll protection program. And I say that because many people saw that as the PPP, but there was very specific spending allowances for that. And it was if you had a certain amount of money and you couldn't lay everybody off, and you still can, keep them on through this payroll protection. And that was wonderful because it was saving jobs. But if you were not having business coming in, were you just, primarily delaying the inevitable. Secondly, PPP did not get down to many small businesses at all, or businesses of color. So what we did at LISC National was to work with various large corporations across the country to get access to grant money. And then at LISC New York City, because we are an affiliate, we actually raised grant money on our own as well to supplement it so that we would have a business relief fund. And the grant is a relief. It's a, immediate infusion of capital to make a difference in the operations and some of the negative financial impact that the business is undergoing at the time. The second part of our transformation is to identify an opportunity for short-term, low-interest loan availability. And I'll mention here, there is a program run by New York State's ESD, the New York Forward Fund, that's available across all of New York State. So if there's any businesses that need that, I recommend that you get in contact with ESD. But that's a short, 1 to 5 year at the longest loan, which will allow the business, as they start to retool, start to re-strategize, and start to change their business operations to be able to operate within COVID and all of the regulations that come with that. Sometimes there's leasehold changes or equipment that needs to be bought, or management analysis or other things. The short-term loan allows that so that the business can continue to operate. And then, of course, on the long term, just repairing the traditional concerns with access to capital, access to bridge financing, revolving loans, insurance and bonding, which is a huge thing, particularly in New York State for minority and women-owned businesses. So those are the 3 steps in the transformation. But what we did at LISC New York City is that we enlisted the help of 17 community-based organizations that are on the ground in the communities, that know the businesses and know those particular communities, and they can identify the businesses that really, have the the wherewithal and desire for that long-term sustainability, and provide that technical assistance to walk the businesses through each step of that 3-step process, and simultaneously providing the back office assistance for the redevelopment and redeployment of their strategies so that they can continue to operate in the long term. So you have to link all 3 things together for long-term sustainability. Otherwise, it just sort of stops at a particular time, and there's not that opportunity for the business to be viable in the end.
Wow, thank you for that great answer. We have a couple questions in the chat. Can you see them?
Yes, I'm going to click on right now.
And I don't know, it's kind of up to you if you want to, if there's one
Okay.
that you feel like you want to answer here.
Okay, so I see how much time I had. So I guess last few speakers take for granted racial equity can be accomplished by improving BIPOC people's ability to navigate capitalism more successfully. Is there any consideration here of theories that argue capitalism is fundamentally racist? Yes, you can say that capitalism, as it has been laid out and practiced in the United States historically, is fundamentally racist, because if you go back to the very beginning of our country, it was based on the nature of capitalism. Even though we talk about our forefathers wanted their freedom and all of that, but it was very limited to who was included in that. So our country has been built on a fundamentally capitalist, racist type of environment. That being said, this is the environment that we're in, and just the whole ability of people to be able to get the access that they need under this society, to be incredibly in a place of equity. Everyone has to understand the system. But I do agree. I think the last speaker said very bluntly that non-minority people, white people, have to take responsibility as well to make these changes. So we can continue to educate the BIPOC community, but also this has to be a holistic desire for equity, and that is very important. So changing the capitalist system, we can say that that's going to happen, but in the meantime, right here, right now, we're in COVID, and these businesses need assistance. So we're finding the best way to do that. So.
Great. Yeah, there's another one I think that just popped up too.
Yes, I see
that one on.
Yes. Okay. How do involved people who have never met, never banked, never had access to capital, how do they take the first step, or how do we help them take the first step? And that's an excellent question. So the first step generally, particularly, it has to do with outreach, and it has to do with the community where those individuals are located, and outreach to provide opportunities, education in how do you begin to get banked. And then there has to be the right banking match, the banking relationship. So, that happens in many ways. Again, I mentioned community-based organizations. We actually at LIST have a program called the Financial Opportunity Center. It's a national program. We have about 135 of them over the US. And basically, we make that marriage between people in communities that haven't been banked with the financial counseling and coaching and education, and then marrying the two with the appropriate bank. So what we do in many of those instances through our intermediary community-based organizations is create relationships with certain banking institutions that through their CRE, Community Reinvestment Act, might provide a specific type of banking opportunities, no fees, no limit on the, or minimum depository rate, and other things to get, people familiar with banking. But what I found the best way to do that are some of the community credit unions like the People's Alliance and, other credit unions that, will work with community-based organizations to deal with and identify those who have not been banked and get them into a banking system. So.
Great, thank you so much. So if folks have additional questions, we got one already. You want to grab that one?
Okay, so this says, is microfinance a good model where you use social collateral versus physical collateral? Quite frankly, I've seen microfinance work very well in a couple of instances. So I think I don't know if I mentioned this, but right after I left Wall Street, I was working at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is one of the first 5 Navy yards that were open in the U.S., which actually employed about 1% of the nation's employed people in 1942. which if you think about that, that's, highly incredible for one place, and just got deteriorated and over, through a number of different activities, is a nonprofit, landlord in an industrial park for small scale urban manufacturing. So the businesses that come in there generally are startups. They're doing, urban manufacturing, so they have to raise money. Even though the rents are below market, they still need capital to produce their products and go forward. So when I was there, I was the vice president of external affairs, and among other things, one of my areas was the business services area, business support services. And we were, identifying different ways to allow these businesses to raise capital. And the crowdfunding, the microfinancing, crowdfunding was one of the ways that a couple of businesses were able to do it. So they put out, and there's services that do this, some for very low cost, put out this funding opportunity, and basically went to family and friends and other business partners, potential clients, and was able to raise through very small $100, $200, $50 investments, sufficient enough money to get the piece of equipment or the leasehold that they needed, or the operating capital that they needed to go forward. So it does, it does help. And it is one of many tools that could be of assistance, particularly for a solo entrepreneur. I would agree that, generally when you're kicking your business off and to utilize your contacts and your network for assistance. And then, there's a mechanism, that the investors would get a return if you're successful. So that is another way to raise funds.
Great, thank you. I have another question here. How can other economic development organizations, like maybe some of the folks on the call today, support you in the work that you're doing and or begin to better support BIPOC solopreneurs ourselves?
Well, we appreciate that. We are always willing to partner with organizations that have like missions and goals, because, the foundation of LIST is to ensure, again, if you look at the mission both nationally and of New York City, we talk about bringing equity and inclusion from an economic standpoint into communities where, that have been disinvested or that do not have equity. So for any community-based organization that is looking to, work on programs that present that, we are certainly happy to do that. And, this upcoming year, there are 5 primary areas that we're going to be concentrating in. One is in workforce development, combined with that economic opportunity center that I mentioned earlier, because we want to close the wealth gap. And what better way to do that is to advance wealth opportunities. Some of that is through entrepreneurship, and other of that is through workforce development. So we're identifying particular cohorts that have not been in the place of equity, and developing workforce development, coupling that with the financial coaching and counseling and education, so that as these cohorts begin to ascend in workforce development, that the coaching and counseling goes along with that. So it may start just with budgeting and transportation to work, then moving on to other things. We're going the transformation for economic development. That's the second area that I mentioned that we're going to be focusing on, and I went into detail with that. Our third is to grow our lending portfolio. We are a lender. We lend for affordable housing and economic development. But like any lender, we have to be cognizant of what the current economic environment is. So we are expanding it and finding other creative ways to bring capital out to the communities. The fourth is our health equity program. We're looking at the impact of health equity in various communities, and how can intervention through, and partnering with various healthcare organizations and foundations but intervention into healthcare, education, and prevention would, impact some of the traditional diseases and, that usually grow in those particular communities. And then the fifth is our affordable housing, and that's what LISC is primarily known for. How can we continue to grow the portfolio of affordable housing in New York, especially now, again, creative financing and bringing capital to that program, because we know that there'll be less available subsidies in the state of New York in general, but particularly in the state of New York, considering our relationship right now with the federal government. That we won't be seeing the same amount of subsidies to grow affordable housing. So just raising capital through various sources to support that whole, and ensuring that we are taking advantage of the opportunity of we'll put in here in New York City, the rental market is right now is the time to start to buy affordable housing properties. So just making sure that there is a agenda and capital available for that. But if there's any of the community-based organizations that have interest in those areas for their particular, where they're located, please be sure to contact me, because we would love to partner with you.
Oh, that is so wonderful. And how are you doing all of this? Like, that is a million things. Oh my goodness.
We are an intermediary, so we do, we rely very heavily on our partners. That's why I always get excited when, other folks say, how can we help? Well, you're a community-based organization or another organization, you have interest in that area, give us a call, and we'll definitely find a way to do that. And it has, it is kind of interesting. I think I shared this with you, Danny, and Alex yesterday, that I started in April. So I've been working remotely, and other than 2 people I hired, I haven't even met my staff in person. So they are, hugely incredible. We just, put out that $1.8 million small business relief grant fund on Monday, and we're growing our lending portfolio and working, and it's all being done remotely. So I'm just fortunate that I have a good support at this point right now.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I don't see any more other questions in the chat box. So are there any other sort of closing words or things that you didn't get a chance to add into this conversation that you'd like to?
I am seeing one more. This looks like a comment. Oh, okay. That comment was something about, probably from our website that talks about lists. I think Lauren put that up. Thank you, Lauren. I just, wanted to congratulate you all for having this forum. I do understand, knowing the North Country well, that there is, the demographics are not necessarily easy to, work within the MWBE space. And so the fact that you are recognizing that and providing information to everyone in the North Country on the best way to, grow and put forth that diversity effort is commendable. It's so pretty up there. I have to say, so and I'll tell this story quick. I grew up in Dutchess County. I'm from Fishkill, New York. I went to college in the Bronx, to Fordham University, and after I was done, I moved to Brooklyn, and I've been living there ever since. But I always bragged about being from, I'm from upstate New York. That was always my bragging right. So when I started working for the state, and I've been to, I thought I knew, my daughter went to Oswego. I know all of New York State. And I, went to literally every region, every corner of New York State. And I no longer can brag that I am from upstate New York, from closer. But, you're just in beautiful, great country. And, anything that I can be of assistance in, furthering your diversity agenda, please be sure to let me know. I think I mentioned that ESD had their regional office, North Country office. I think one is in Watertown and one is in Plattsburgh. And the folks in those offices were just incredibly helpful in terms of furthering MWBE. They can also put you in touch with entrepreneur assistance programs. And I don't think there were any PTACs, the Federal Procurement Technical Assistance, in that area, but you can find out there. But the ESD staff and the MWBE staff, if I must say so myself, they're fabulous. So I hope you take advantage of those opportunities, and feel free to reach out to me and anyone, and I look forward to hearing from folks.
We absolutely will reach out, and thank you so much. And I will just say, there is a PTAC office in the Watertown area, I think, or Jefferson or Lewis counties, and we can share that with folks afterwards, those resources.
Right.
But we will be reaching out. We're trying to put together a working group to work on this, you know, as small business owners think about this and economic developers across the region. And I cannot thank you enough from the bottom of our heart for sharing your Friday afternoon with us.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate it and hope to get the chance to talk to you all again. And when the world opens up, you know, visit North Country once more.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you so much, Ellen.
Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank
Take care.
you. I'm going to interject here before we call on Jim Sonneborn, who's ANCA's board chair, to wrap things up. So Jim, I'm going to put you on the spot, if that's okay. 3 questions. What surprised you in what you heard? What did you learn? And what are you going to do about it?
So you've unmuted me. So what have I learned? I actually think that the thing I have learned the most is reflected by the number of participants who are listening. While I clearly appreciated and learned a lot from the speakers and from the whole day, our board meeting this morning talked about this as well, the investment of time on the part of 60 or 70 people, which is a significant number of people, taking into account that, you know, this is a Zoom call. You know, it is a spectacularly beautiful day outside. What I've learned is that there are a lot of people who are genuinely interested, and I believe that converts to want to make the situation better. So that's what I've learned. What was I surprised about? I will tell you, I was surprised a little bit by some of the things that Nikki said. I admire her greatly, but I really liked and was a little surprised by direct, unequivocal, this is where it is, and her appreciation of our limitation. And I would, you know, I thought about things as people were talking, because you wanted me to make some closing remarks. Her impatience, which is one of the things that I think we all need to be going forward. We need to be impatient. I thought about angry. Angry isn't productive, but I think impatient and passionate and driven, and she was communicating that well. And what was the third one? I don't remember what your third one was. No, you've muted yourself. You have to undo. Can't hear you. Well, yep, there you go. Yeah, I can't. I don't know if anybody else can hear you, but I cannot.
What are you going to do as a result?
Well, I think that the most important thing that I am doing, and I have been doing, is to change my mindset, to better understand within myself. And I try to make it easier for me to not define myself as having implicit bias. I like the lawyer's term that there is a presumption that is a rebuttable or overcomable presumption, because yesterday I spoke to my friend B. Gonzalez and talked about the fact that we all walk down the street with presumptions. When we see someone, you know, if I see 2 17 or 18 or 19-year-old kids with their pants hanging off and their hair green or blue or whatever, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, I walk towards those people with a presumption, partly because of their age, maybe because of their color, but I do. And I need to be conscious on a more day-to-day basis of my presumptions or my implicit biases. And I really am acutely aware of these issues on a personal level because of situations in my own family. If I can, I'm going to continue right with the closing remarks that I have. And I start with what I think is important is to thank you, Kate, and to thank Nikki and Adam and Brianna and Jared and Valerie and Danny and truly the whole staff at ANCA. Both the board meeting this morning and this presentation this afternoon presents me with it reinforces my belief that this is a moment in time different from remembering the events of the 60s or the 80s or anything in between the 60s and now, about seizing an opportunity, that we have an opportunity. And I'll go back to what I said before, which is that we need to be impatient and we need to be insistent. But I would also say that we also need to recognize that we have been doing this badly for 300 years. We didn't just start doing this badly. We have a long history of doing this badly. And, you know, I can be optimistic and pessimistic in the same thing. I attended the University of Virginia. Thomas Jefferson was a brilliant man who clearly understood that slavery was wrong, wrote about his views of slavery, but he had slaves. And he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and it maybe freed up a few people to be able to vote, but even in the Constitution, and even as we move forward, we didn't have 50% of the people even voting. Women didn't vote. Many minority groups didn't vote. We went from a very small number to a less small number. And it's been a continuum from what I understand from reading and listening. We had a lot of people of color who got to register to vote and did register to vote in the latter part of the 1860s and 70s and 80s. And that was a huge step forward, but we then had a pretty significant step back. We have done a pretty good job of, I think, we've done the steps forward and then the failures and the steps back. But my view is that we sit at a moment of opportunity. I think the region is at a moment of opportunity. We are documented as the most tolerant region in the United States. That may be a little disconcerting when we look at some of the events of the last few months, but if we get to set an example, and ANCA talks about posting some of the things we're doing for other communities to use and emulate and copy, and we are already, before this national movement, world movement became a center of attention, we were already talking about the issues that we're focused on today. We were poised to lead, interesting, that is what is essentially a relatively rural part of the world. We have some wonderful small cities, but they're small cities. We have the opportunity to set examples that can be emulated everywhere. And I'd admonish the group to figure out what you can do as individuals, because it will take us and our efforts as individuals to make the changes that we need to make. And you know, this isn't the first step. This is one of the steps. As I said, we started this a long time ago, different people in different ways, but we need to continue to move forward on these issues involving minorities and people of color and whatever phrase that people are comfortable with. And I also would say to you all, keep in mind, there are probably people who are well-intentioned who just don't get it, and we have to figure out how to bring them into this conversation. I saw a sign that said, "White lives matter too." It was the "two" that was just totally unnerving. Really? They don't understand the premise, so you can't bring them from the premise because they haven't even gotten to understand the question. So we all need to figure out how we're going to expand that. Nikki's talked about how she's going to reach out to a very educationally diverse group of people in the next couple of months. And I hope I think we can all go away from this feeling good and bad at the same time. So I guess that's my last comment. We should all feel good and we should all feel bad. And thank you all for coming.